Just how does one become an expat? What things must you do first?
Maybe get a place on the ocean.
Gain travel experience?
I can start visiting, get to know a place, and then when I retire, I'll already have it.
Search for the ideal location. Live abroad in many different places.
So we lived in Spain in southern Granada. So that's when we came to Panama. So we didn't live in Panama City. We actually lived on the island of Crete. Island living in Greece is epic. We're in Transylvania. We didn't get that in Romania. And we did go to the island and lived in Noto in southeastern Sicily.
Las Peñitas, Nicaragua. Part 2 of an exceptional expat story. I've spent the past year and a half driving my motorcycle through Latin America, living in each country for a minimum of 6 weeks. This has been one of the most difficult projects I've ever embarked upon, and I really hope you enjoy all this content coming at you now. Scene change. It was getting a bit sizzly on the first floor of that spot we were just at over at. This is very breezy. We are actually both nicely lit in with a shade of this little place right here. So you were talking about your first time living abroad. You lived in Spain. You were working. How long did you live in Spain?
So a lot of places that we lived, we were bound by visa limits. So we were exploring different places. We gave up our home in the US. So this is important because people were like, so were you a tourist? And we're like, no. We actually moved. We took our kids. We moved all of our stuff. We didn't keep a place anywhere else. So we were homeless otherwise. So we moved to Spain for 3 months, which is what we got in a visa limit. And then basically that's what we did almost every place that we lived. So we lived in Spain in southern Granada. I actually rented a house in...
This is a good Granada, not the bad Granada.
Right. The very non-touristy Granada, although it did have the Alhambra, which is in both. So good Granada, but we lived in a small village, Cañar, south of the city, out in the mountains in the Sierra Madres. And so really small village, way up in the mountains. Really interesting small village experience. It was great. My kids went through a lot of life milestones there, and we were able to explore a lot of Andalusia, southern Spain, from there. We were able to go to Cordoba. We were able to go to Cadiz. We were able to go to Africa and Morocco. We really got to know southern Spain really well during that time. It was amazing.
So you stayed there for 3 months. Yep. The maximum amount of the visa, and then you have to leave for 3 months in order to get 3 more, right?
That was our plan, was to be doing just a simple 3 in, 3 out. And then bouncing, we thought either to somewhere in Europe. At the time, we had a pretty good plan. We're going to do Latin America and then Europe. But when we wanted to stay in Europe, we were like, okay, we'll just do Western Europe and then do Eastern Europe, which is outside the Schengen and doesn't have that.
Right. So go to Ukraine or go somewhere else.
Exactly, and we did at one point.
Okay.
So that's when we came to Panama. We ended up, like I said, we didn't live in Panama City, which everyone's just like, you lived in one of these places. We lived in Rio Hato. So I've never met an expat who's even been to Rio Hato. It's on the southern coast, a couple hours west of the city. It was a really interesting experience with how Panama is different than everywhere else. But of course, for us, it was our first Latin American country. So it wasn't different for us. It was like, this is what it's like. Yeah. But then Panama City was so different. And that's why we were like, oh, we got to explore more of this. So once I did the work thing, that didn't work out. We returned to Nicaragua and did our stint there for 3 months.
That was your first time coming to Nicaragua, right? After Panama.
First time setting foot in the country. And it went well. We did again, explored the country extensively, got to see, it was amazing. Even after 3 months, I talked to so many people who were like, you've been to more of Nicaragua than all my friends from Nicaragua had been, right? They'd be like, you've been to Chinandega? Like, that's crazy. Who goes there? So we had a really good feel for all these different regions and areas that we liked and things that we weren't so excited about. And so we were very much ready to return to Europe at that point. We went really briefly and lived in Galveston, just because we had to deal with some stuff.
That's Texas, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, in the Houston area. And because my wife's family's all there, so we had some family stuff for a little while. And then we were back to Europe after that.
So you did, was it 3 months in Panama and 3 months in Nicaragua? What was the time span about that?
Roughly, yeah. It was, Panama was a little bit dictated because you can stay in Panama longer. Right, it's not like all these 3 month places, but actually both of these countries are 6 months. But we were dictated by work schedules and flights and stuff, so it was a little bit more flexible.
So you did Spain, and then down to Panama, first time in Latin America, and then Nicaragua, first time here, and then you went back to Europe after the US a little bit.
Yes, okay. So we started 2016. We actually flew to Europe on New Year's Day, and 2016 we started in Greece. Did Greece during the winter, which was amazing. We actually lived on the island of Crete. So island living in Greece is epic. Like, that was so many great experiences. The food, the weather, the culture. But it's winter in Greece. There's no people. Like everyone leaves the island. Everyone's
low season. You're the very few foreigners that are there. Right?
We're the very few people. It had nothing to do with foreigners because there's no foreigners ever in this part of, like, we were remote Crete. And so real quick, funny story. The house that we rented in Crete was deep in a tiny village on a back street in the middle of the island, like so completely not touristy. We were the first people to ever rent it. When we went to pay the final bill when we moved off of Crete, I met the owner. She and I grew up in the same town of 4,500 people in Western New York. Like, we were basically neighbors. It was the weirdest coincidence ever. Couple decades apart in age, but it was very funny. And so Greece was a really great experience. From there, we moved just a little bit north to Romania and lived in central Transylvania.
I've heard good things about Romania. My buddy actually that lives in Brazil, we met in Brazil. He's from Oregon. He actually went to Romania for quite a while, and he said it was quite good.
Oh, it's amazing. We loved it. It's probably in the total experience, it's probably my second favorite place I've ever been.
Wow.
Greece has a lot going for it because of all the ocean or the Mediterranean and the island living. You don't get that in Romania. And Romania, the complete lack of sea everywhere. Of course, they have a little bit of Black Sea coast. We're in Transylvania, which is as far from that as you're going to get. We're deep in the mountains in this very rural, small village area. But the culture was so fantastic. The whole, like, everybody brews their own brandy. Everyone makes their own cognac. Everyone makes their own wine. Everyone's just drunk all the time. Super chill. It's green and lush and rainy. It was so just wonderful. I loved Romania. It's very high. Even my kids are like, oh, we wish we could go back.
Okay, so you did quite a bit of experiences in that region of the world. Did you go back to Latin America after that?
We did not. We had meant to. We had on our schedule originally to go to both Argentina and Chile, and some stuff just came up, and we ended up not doing that when we expected to. And so this is probably true for a lot of travelers, right? As you go, things just change, and you end up going where it ends up opportune at the moment. And we had some places we felt we needed to be, and a really big one for us was Italy. And so after Romania and a visit to the U.S., we returned to Europe. Had reset everything, and lived in southern Italy. My wife is Sicilian, and so we've always had like we can't skip Italy. First of all, it's in the middle of all the places we love, and it's Italy, and she's Italian. So we didn't end up going to like the village that her family's from, or even the city, but we did go to the island and lived in Noto in southeastern Sicily, which was a really interesting experience. I would not recommend Noto. Italy is amazing, of course, but Noto was a little bit too remote, a little bit too weird. Very, very far possible end of the island. Palermo. If you're going to do Sicily, be close to Palermo. It's worth it. And then...
How long were you in Transylvania and Italy for these trips?
3 months and 3 months. Yep. And then from there, we did another stint in Kiev, which the war was actually on at that time. So it wasn't like full on like it is now. Like, it wasn't like at all. But the invasion had already started at that point, and there were troops on the streets.
That was in Crimea, right, when that happened? Or what?
This is the Crimea had already been taken. Yeah. So I think that's right. So it was only the eastern provinces at that point. There was an incursion. There were troops on the streets.
Okay.
We had friends that we were staying with that were in the military that are like every Tuesday they had to go deploy and stuff because they're in like the reserves. And we lived very close to the Russian embassy, so it was a very hot area. And like the airport, when you go to fly out, there's like bombers everywhere, and they're like, no, these are ready to go. These are from Moscow, right? Like, this is not a joke. We're just waiting for a go ahead, and we want to go. So it was kind of tense, but it was also really interesting. And we had been in Macedonia when they overthrew the government, like earlier the year before, which was not nearly as violent. They were just throwing paint at each other, but managed to be in some interesting places.
How long were you in Ukraine for?
Less than 3 months. I don't know exactly how long, but it was similar, right? It was, and some friends of ours. This is actually really cool. Some friends of ours are like, oh, we're gonna hook you up with an apartment. We're gonna do all this stuff, and I'm like, is it possible to get like an old Soviet apartment block apartment? And they're like, it's possible. It's not desirable. And I'm like, I totally want to do that. They're like, whatever. That's the cheapest possible thing. So they got us this like 5th story, really old, like 1982 Soviet apartment building with like a whole bunch of these old modern architecture buildings looking on an old park in the dead center of the city. It was so iconic. Like, I grew up in the Cold War, so we'd always seen these things on TV, but they never really existed in real life. So getting to live in one was honestly really cool.
And
awful. I would not recommend it in general.
so after this trip or after this time you spent there, did you move to another place in Europe or did you go to Latin America after that?
So after that, we actually had to come back to the U.S. We had some things with work that I needed with my company. We had to come back and deal with that. So that was in late 2017. I ended up doing a bit of work in Arizona that year, so I was flying all over in the U.S.
Okay.
And then 2017, 2018, just worked in the U.S. We didn't want to get stuck there, but it just kind of like work and life and stuff. And we still had a house, so it was like we have this house where it's a lot more cost effective to actually live in your own house because we didn't have renters or anything. So we ended up there for a little while, and then in 2019, still there for a bit. But I came down to Nicaragua, and this kind of kicked off another stage of our lives. I had a business partner that was older, not a lot older, but a little bit older than me, and he was like, you know what? So he came to me probably around 2016. He said, Scott, you've lived in a lot of places. I'm starting to have an eye towards retirement. Not ready to retire, but I'm really thinking like maybe get a place on the ocean so I can start visiting, get to know a place, and then when I retire, I'll already have it. Like a lot of people have this vision. So I'm like, that's cool. That makes a lot of sense. He's like, you've lived all over. Can you help me figure out where I should be? I'm like, cool. This will be a fun project. So we spent like 2 years digging through, and we were looking very seriously at Mexico, very seriously at Ecuador. I was watching tons of videos on places. I'd visited a lot of places. And we kept narrowing it down, and it kept coming out to Nicaragua. Just kept being the answer. And I'm like, this feels cheesy because I've lived there and I've not lived in these other places. So are we selecting this because I live there, or does it actually make sense? But we kept narrowing down the factors. And of course, Nicaragua has better tax regime than most countries. It has a lower cost of living in general than most countries. It has a lot more Pacific Ocean than a lot of countries, especially as a ratio to the population. A lot of available ocean front. And so things just kept, and it's easy to get back to the U.S., the same time zone. If you're going to be not retired, but edging towards retirement, being in a time zone and quick access to the U.S. can be a big deal, or to Canada, whatever. And so we kept coming back to Nicaragua being the answer. And by about 2018, he was like, oh, I'm falling in love with the idea of Nicaragua. This is looking good. Like at first, he's like, I don't know anything about this. I'm really, what? And then he just kept being like, oh, this is good. This is good. So by 2019, we managed to schedule a trip down, and we came down for a couple of weeks, and he just fell in love with. We went to San Juan del Sur, actually, and went there in Granada, did the touristy thing, which he knew it was going to be kind of touristy, and it was a really great experience, and it was great for me to be back and get some time, and I was like, oh my gosh, I miss it. It was so fantastic.
So how long was that time that you guys spent down here during that period?
Just a couple of weeks.
At this point, were you considering living in Nicaragua, or was this still kind of you discovering the country and enjoying it and not even thinking about living here yet?
So when we came down, I wasn't thinking about moving down. I came down with my best friend. She's a real estate agent, or was in the U.S. Now she's a castle investor in Europe. And
that's a pretty cool job title, by the way. Awesome job title. Castle investor, by the way.
Right. So
what do you do? Oh, yeah, Wall Street. Oh, castle investment.
Right. I mean, to be fair, she's new to it. Like, she's not like a mature castle investor. She doesn't have like a giant portfolio, but she's getting the ball rolling, right? Like she has, yeah. So we came down. She fell in love with Nicaragua, and like her excitement was really a big deal because she and I had lived in Spain together. We'd been to Africa together, and so this was a whole new part of the world for her. She's from Texas. And she was so just like, this is the most amazing place I've ever been. She was so excited. Like Spain she loved, and she'd lived in Europe for a while. But she was just like, wow, Nicaragua. And that really added a lot of excitement to like the whole trip. And my business partner, he basically got off the plane. Technically we landed at night. But once the sun came up in the morning, he was like, this is paradise. Why am I just not here? Like, why should I get on a plane home? Like, and he brought enough stuff that he didn't actually have to get on a plane home. Like, he was that serious about it. And so we put in 2 weeks down here, a lot of that in San Juan, which is where he thought he wanted to be. He really wanted to be around expats. At that point, I wasn't looking at coming down. But that trip, I spent enough time and watching their excitement and like rediscovering Nicaragua for myself. It's like, oh, there was things I've forgotten. I love it here. And it has all these factors that I'd worked out for him, of course, as to why it made sense. And I'd long had the opinion that we needed to move out of the U.S., that the U.S. is expensive. It's not where we want to be. We don't want to travel to, like, Oklahoma. We lived in Dallas. Like, Oklahoma's nice. Don't get me wrong. I love Oklahoma City. Like, it's fun to go out for drinks and stuff. But it wasn't like our travel destination. It wasn't like, oh, let's go spend 3 months in Oklahoma. It wasn't like that. So
you guys have a bit more of like an adventure travel type of lifestyle, right? And less of like a visiting the local domestic type of things. Is that right? Or
we tend to be very get to know the culture kind of place. So we're not doing like adventure travel. Like we had adventurous locations.
Yeah.
Like
I guess that's what I was more saying, like more adventurous, like exotic places, but like, maybe not doing like, like going on a boogie board down a mountain or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, my daughter and my wife and my daughter actually went down a volcano here. That's like a huge thing in Nicaragua. I've not done that.
Was that the boarding one
Yeah.
down? She did the volcano boarding?
Yes, my wife.
You haven't done that?
I have not.
That's like that's the number one thing people do when they come to Nicaragua. Like one of the first things. They come here to Leon, boom, volcano boarding, and they go to another, like the Ometepe or whatever they go to in Granada. Yeah, so I thought I'd mention that because I was like, oh, you've been here so long, haven't done it.
I've not done it. I know all the guys who do it. If you're coming to Leon, talk to Volcano Day or Bigfoot. They will take you on the tours and stay with them. They'll bring you down here to the beach for drinks afterwards. This is the beach they come to after the volcano boarding. So it's a lot of fun. Those two like run the show. Like they do like all the volcano boarding around here. I think they're wearing, oh no, often they have the shirts on around here, popular on the beach. We really had this like, I kind of got this vision of, I've wanted to move out of the US. We wanted a lower cost location. I wanted when we're in between travel to be like we were still traveling, right? And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make is they make this like, well, I need to go back to the US. I need to, or wherever. I need to have this anchor.
Yeah.
You're like, why? Why do you need that anchor, especially in a high cost location? Yeah. If you're from Nicaragua, yeah, okay, you're gonna go home and save all this money while you're in between things. But we would stop traveling and it would cost us more. and we owned a house. Like just the food and the day-to-day living cost us more, let alone, and the house was on top of that. When we were in Romania, it was like the best example. Every day we were in Romania paying for a house in the US and paying to live in Romania, we saved money. It was that much cheaper. And so
That's bizarre, isn't it?
It really is. But when you run those numbers, it can happen. So when I went back, I started talking to my wife and I said, I think maybe Nicaragua is the place we should be. It's close enough to home. And for us, this is weird. Her family's in Houston. It's not weird that they're in Houston. A lot of people live there. 7 million people have made that decision. But we lived in Dallas. So the travel time between us was between 5 and 6 hours. Yeah. Like by the time you pack up the car, you go and everything. Well, if we lived somewhere near Managua, our travel time to Houston is about 3 hours. So I'm like, technically we're farther away, but in time, we're just as close. By the time you go to the airport, do all the things, it's about the same. Right. And the airport that a lot of the flights from here go into is right next to her family's house.
Oh, there you go.
So we're like, this solves the no farther from the family thing, but our cost of living goes way down. And we loved Nicaragua. And for a while, she was like, I don't know. I remember Granada. I wasn't that into it. It wasn't my thing. I'm like, you're remembering Granada. Don't forget the rest of Nicaragua. And she liked Granada. It was just the tourist stuff. It was all that. And so she was like, okay. And it took weeks, and we started thinking about it. And after like 2-3 months, we were looking at some property, and I said, oh, look at this beautiful place on the beach. And she goes, wait, on the beach? We could get a place on the beach? And I'm like, of course we could get a place on the beach. And she's like, well, make that happen. I said, stop. If you tell me to sell our house in Texas and get you a place on the beach in Nicaragua, it's going to be done. We're going to have a place tomorrow. We're done here. She's like, no, make it happen. I'm like, okay. So I just jumped on it, and then COVID hit. So we got stuck right as it was going to we would never have made it, right? It didn't matter.
The most unfortunate time to make a big decision, right?
It was terrible, absolutely terrible. So we got stuck for all that time trying to look at YouTube videos of Nicaragua to make informed choices from abroad, to fantasize about where we're going to go, to make like just general decisions. It was tough.
You wanted to make that move down to Nicaragua. You were thinking about it, got the confirmation, the stamp of approval. COVID hits. Okay. And so how did this lead to you actually moving down?
So we spent that time during COVID, as a lot of people did, right? Fantasizing about getting out. I think that really solidified for a lot of people the getting out vibe. And so the upside is we got a lot of time, and we had an office here, right? Our company had staff here. So we had this feedback coming from the country of like, oh, here's some options, here's some ideas. So we were doing a lot of looking at property from abroad, which now is something I warn people about. Like, it's very tempting anywhere, right, to look at property from abroad, and you don't have the context you need to do that. It can be very dangerous.
I watched your video on that. Very good information. Watch that video, and we're going to talk about his channel where he talks about this in just a minute.
Cool. Yeah, so it was a bad decision to do that, but for us it worked out because we had nothing else to do during COVID. We're all stuck in the house, and we came up with a lot of ideas, like different areas of the beach that we were interested in. We thought we had really honed in on things. We went through some cycles of working with agents and sending out our crew to look at places, and discovered like every house they tried to sell us, we'd see beautiful pictures, they'd get there, the places falling down, didn't really exist, wasn't where they said it was, all kinds of things. We were really getting really wary. But then we eventually found a place that we thought we had really narrowed in on. And as COVID was starting to wane and flights were starting to happen, we tried to make a purchase. And my business partner and I, who's sitting here, came down and we did all the stuff. We did all the paperwork to buy the place. We went out to check it out. And we had to fly into Honduras because there weren't flights here yet for another year. So it was crazy. So we're flying into Tegucigalpa. We're having our staff drive us over the border. It was really complicated during that time. And that was a big reason why we didn't move down. It's everything was, it wasn't that it was locked down here. It really wasn't. It was just closed. There was no restaurants. There was no hotels. There was nothing. Everything had shut down. And so you had real logistic problems coming down. So that gave us an advantage, though. There could not be other buyers. Anyone who was going to even look at a property had to fly to another country and have all these logistics. So that worked in our favor. We went and looked at this place, and we had made a commitment to buy it, and we knew we were overpaying, but it was going to move the whole process along. My wife was not going to move until we did something. So we got there, we showed up, and we're we already did all the work with the lawyers. We're done. We're just ready to sign. The money's ready to transfer. And we get there and we walk around, and it was more or less what we were expecting. It wasn't a huge surprise. There were negatives, but they weren't big. We're yeah, we overpaid by a bit. We definitely we got gringoed, right? But we knew it was within the scope of risk. And we sit down, and the guy was all fine until we were just about ready to leave, and we weren't there to negotiate. He didn't need to be there. We were just looking at it, right? The paperwork was done, the agreement was made. The guy all of a sudden pulls our manager aside, and he's this is the first time I met them, so none of the deals we made are real. Now we're going to make the real deal, and I've upgraded the place since you made the agreement. And we're no, you didn't. You downgraded it. You actually did damage that we didn't want. We'd like you to take it out. And he's nope, you have to pay more for it. And we're already we're not comfortable with the deal now. Everything's going wrong, and we knew we were overpaying by a significant amount. And so all of a sudden the guy says, well, if you don't want to pay more for it, I'm perfectly happy keeping the place and running it. And I just go, awesome, thanks, and got up and left.
Dodged a bullet right there.
Completely. And my business partner just looked at him and he goes, oh, don't piss Scott off. And our business manager had never seen this happen. And he's just well, what just, and he goes, I guess we're done here. And we just left, and we completely saved ourselves. It was the best thing. I cannot believe that guy had us overpaying by so much money. It was done. We were committed. We had never in any way suggested we were going to back out. It was set.
And you're the landlord that had this house that you were about to sell. You missed out on some big monies there.
Right? Seriously, we're pretty sure it hasn't sold since then, and he was going to get at least 40% above market. Yeah, and in a time period where nothing was moving, so it was crazy. So we were immediately okay, so that didn't work, but we know we need a place on the beach. We had figured out a bunch of things that we wanted, and so we immediately just went up and down the beaches looking at different places.
Was that here in Peñitas or what beach?
In Puchamil, which is part of the Managua zone.
Yeah.
But it's a popular beach, a lot like this, in the Managua area, and we thought that would be good, being closer to Managua. And we had just found this deal that we thought was really good. But once we were here, we were oh, the amount that was not a good deal started to dawn on us. We always knew, but we didn't know how much. Once we were here, we were well, we're in person. So now we can get a really good deal. So we just drove up and down the coast, went to every beach we could, and came here and was just Las Bonitas is where we want to be. We don't know what place we want, but we know this is the village we want. And so we didn't have time to do any shopping or anything, but we had spent time in Huehuete, which is close to Puchamil. And we had gone on the beach, and we looked, and it's a beautiful beach. Oh, it's fantastic. And we found some people who spoke English, and we're hey, can you tell us, are any places available? There's not a single for sale sign. And the guy goes, all of it. He's no one has a for sale sign because there's no buyers. It's not worth writing for sale on something. Who's going to read it? Nobody. But any business, any building you want, just walk in and make them an offer, and maybe they won't take your offer, but they will sell at a good offer. Everybody. And we're everything's we're everything we've been told is fake.
That was a mind-bending moment, right? We went from one perspective of buying things to a different one. Right?
Yes, very much so. Because, shopping online, even during COVID, they're oh, the market's hot. People are buying things. Yeah, they're a little bit deep down, but it's going fast. Nothing had sold. There was places that people were talking about turning over had been vacant for years. Everything was fake. Everything we heard was untrue. And it was like, oh my gosh. And we talked to people. They're like, you are the only buyers we've seen in years. Not a single person has passed through, even with, no one's even turned it down. No one has looked.
Where is this at again?
This was the entire coast.
Wow.
We just went up and down the coast, even in San Juan del Sur, where everyone was saying like it was the hottest market. We went into places that should have been there. They'd say, oh, it was worth a few $1 million. We'd walk in, they'd be like, if you give us $250 right now, it's yours. And we'd be like, I don't even know if it's worth $250, right? And we didn't take it.
And they're advertising it for like 10 times more than that or something.
Everyone's talking like, they were talking like $2 million for some of these properties, and the owners are like, no, you give me $250,000 right now, we're done. And we're like, oh my gosh. And so we started going up and down the coast, and we're like, these aren't the places we wanted. We fell in love with Las Piñitas, and it's so close to León. We're the only beaches here in Ponaloya that are within a few minutes of the city. We're actually considered part of the city.
So how far away is Peñitas from León, for those that don't know?
About 17 kilometers. Yeah. So if you're driving, it's going to be a little bit under 20 minutes. But that's to get to like downtown. So it's very.
I drove from downtown. It took me about 20 minutes coming down here. We actually are at Peñitas. For those that don't know, we didn't actually mention that. We're in Peñitas at the current moment.
Yes. And so we're the southern beach, and just north of us is Ponaloya. It's a little bit older beach. They're kind of the twin beaches of León. And so we were here, and we actually, from where we're sitting, just one restaurant over, we sat and we had lunch there, and we're like, everything about this vibe is just, this is right for us. And so we had to return to the States, but we told our crew that was with us, we're like, find us a place in Las Piñitas. And so they drove out from Managua a few times, walked around, they found a place and just walked through it with a GoPro, and they sent us some videos, and they go, what do you think? And I'm like, oh, that looks good. They just walked up to the owner, and they're like, would you like to sell this place? And he's like, oh, thank goodness. And it turned out they were about to go out of business. Like, and we were trying to buy a house. We were just looking for a house. But in Pushmil, we had ended up with a hotel. It just worked out that a hotel would have been a better house for us. We couldn't find a house we liked. But we found a hotel that didn't seem to be open. Why not just use a hotel as a house? Because here in Nicaragua, this is important. In Nicaragua, the average hotel is only the size of a large house. There's a tax law that makes this, it's not that you have to do that, it's that there's a heavy tax benefit to making what's roughly a 9-bedroom fancy house into a hotel, or vice versa. And so it's very common for a house to convert to a hotel and a hotel to convert to a house, and often back and forth over time, just as people have different uses or as the market goes up and down. And so the market actually absorbs a bit of traffic by doing that. But part of it is to discourage the giant resorts that like Mexico has, where beaches are just cut off from the public. It makes a bunch of small businesses, and the public gets to keep access to the beach and stuff. I really like the system. Yeah. It's interesting how they use a tax regime to encourage a kind of good, healthy beach behavior. Yeah. In general, it affects the cities too, but the beaches is where it's really nice. And so we've been planning on getting a house, but then once we got the house, they were like, okay, so what do you want to do with the reservations? And we're like, the what now? And they're like, yeah, the reservations. Like this is a working hotel, and we're like, well, I guess we'll keep them. I don't want to be like a jerk and cancel on people, and we don't need the whole place, I guess. Yeah. So we just kind of started like running the hotel we had taken over, and over time we're like, okay, we kind of like doing this. We like, the whole thing is cool. My wife and I had a background in hospitality. We had both worked in hotels when we were younger, so managing a hotel now that we're older was like, okay, this is kind of cool, a thing we could do. And so we kind of stuck to it and really enjoyed it.
That was in Pushmil, you said, right?
No, that is here.
That was here in Peñitas.
And so we started living here, but then we were living on the beach, and we're like, you know what? After like a year on the beach, we're like, living on the beach is actually really stressful. Like we're expats, we're very visible. I have a YouTube channel. We're so in everybody's face, and everybody's so in our face. We ended up really liking living in the city and then coming out to the beach. We like being really close. Yeah. We don't like being here. And so that was kind of the start of us living in this zone. It encouraged us into León. And we ended up really falling in love with the city of León and the whole zone. So it was a lot of just kind of organic coming up with where we were. It wasn't the amount of good planning that really should have been.
I actually have something to share that's very similar. I've lived on beaches many times as well. And after doing that so many times, I lived on a beach in Colombia, in a small fishing village. And as awesome as it is to be away from the city, it's like, man, it's really inconvenient. Like I really miss conveniences. And being in the big cities is something I really enjoy now. I'm from a really small town in Minnesota, actually right next to a 1,000 person town in the countryside and next to a corn farm. So it's like, I grew up on the exact opposite spectrum, the tiny countryside life. I like the big cities. And yeah, I totally understand why you would like Leon for that reason.
And I grew up on a farm in Western New York. So like my nearest village was 10 miles away.
That started your actual move over, and you were living here for a year on the beach. And then when did you decide to move to Leon, the actual capital?
So we started moving into Leon after almost a year, a little bit less. And what it started with, it was completely different. We're like, oh, we keep going to Leon so much that I don't know if you've tried it, but taxis from here are a little bit expensive. Like they're not expensive compared to other places, but they're expensive compared to the rest of Nicaragua because of the distance, and you tend to go at night, and there's a lot of nightlife in Leon, and there's not here. The beaches are very quiet, except for San Juan del Sur. And so we kept going into the city, and we were like, we actually did the math. We're like, the taxis are so much, we could get an apartment in the city cheaper than paying the taxis. So we go, which would we prefer?
Could you give, by the way, just for people that wouldn't know, it's about a 20, 25-minute taxi ride or whatever. What would be like the average cost going to the downtown from here?
It's about 400 Cordobas. So that's about $12 to $14.
Yeah. So about $12 for about 20 minutes. We're talking about 50 cents per minute, more or less, which is really good for the cost of living here is really low. But then again, if you're doing that many times, like you said, if you go down more than once a week, round trip, then it adds up.
Right, and especially when you start to consider that, like, how quickly does that add up when the cost of an apartment in the city could be like $200, right? For a multi-bedroom, very decent place in a good part of town that you can walk to from all the places. Like, that's more convenient, it's safer, it's more flexible.
You moved into this hotel in what year again?
That was 2021.
Okay, so this was 2 years ago. Have you been here nonstop since this point in time when you moved from the beach to Leon? Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Well, so we've been here continuously since I think we're here in February of 2021. We left for a few weeks and then we're back. So depending on when you consider the first, like technically in February we were not permanent yet, and then we were permanent a few weeks later, whatever. But we've not left Nicaragua other than visits to like the U.S. for like Christmas, or like I just took a business trip to Bolivia. But other than like really quick trips places, we've been continuously in Nicaragua since then.
Do you still have a tourist visa? Do you have a residency visa? How does that work?
So we're still on the tourist visa. And that's kind of, so you get a lot of flexibility with that, which people are always amazed by. A general tourist visa is going to give you half a year under normal circumstances. And then you can renew by simply crossing the border. So that can be really easy. You can get a year and a half, 2 years, and all you're doing is going into Costa Rica for a total of 5 hours. Right, over that course of time. And if you're like us, a lot of times we'd be like, well, we're going back for Christmas to the States to see family. Well, then we'd be gone for a few weeks. We'd come back, everything's renewed. We didn't have to do a border run or anything. Our normal travel kept renewing our visas. Yeah. So we've had to do like, in 3 years almost, we've had to do like 2 border runs to make it all work. We are working on our residency. That takes time because it depends what you want to do. If you determine you want residency, which a lot of people don't need, right? That's the first thing. A lot of people feel they need residency when they don't. If you're a digital nomad, almost certainly you don't. If you do want to settle here permanently, it's still only a maybe.
I think a lot of people perhaps have the idea that, for example, in Mexico, the regulations have started appearing out of nowhere, where in the past it didn't really happen. I'm seeing a lot on the expat groups. Oh, Mexico, you don't get the 90 days. Sometimes you get a 30 days, sometimes it's 60. And then they're making things more complicated at certain borders, at certain airports. And I think people see those stories, the ones that are looking at living abroad, and they think, okay, well, that's probably happening everywhere. But you're saying it doesn't.
Right. It does not happen everywhere. Remember, each country is a separate place. And Nicaragua definitely does not copy anyone in the region. So whatever they're doing is generally their own thing. So no problems like that. Staying here as a tourist often is what makes sense for most people. A lot of the people who live here on the beach are tourists because they work somewhere. So they're gone every 3 to 6 months. They have to go work somewhere for a month or whatever. They're gone so much that they may not even apply for residency may not be applicable for them. For us, we do want residency. It does give a few tiny benefits. The big one is you can drive across borders and like travel by car more with your own car. Like it's real minor stuff. But it can make sense. It's very much I would recommend people put in 1 or 2 years and make a decision based on a lot of time and a lot of, and if you're here doing, being a really good tourist resident in Nicaragua, then you have this like really good portfolio of time to show the government and be like, hey, I've been really good. I'm a good candidate for residency. It makes it that much easier. If you want like a retirement visa or a marriage visa, those are very easy. You can get those quite quickly if they make sense for you. If you want to do investment, that's become a lot harder. That's generally going to take people a few years. I don't know anyone who's getting that in under a year, and a lot of people it's 3, 4, 5 years. That's common. So there's not necessarily a big rush. For a lot of people, visas may not make sense. You may just want to be on a tourist visa, not worry about residency.